Maggie Lena Walker opened a bank white America said would collapse. Washerwomen and porters brought her their rejected pennies, their hope. She turned spare change into an empire they said impossible. Her name was Maggie Lena Walker, and she was about to become the first woman in American history to charter and lead a bank. Not the first black woman. Not the first in her region. The first woman, period. She accomplished this with pennies from people the entire banking system had deemed invisible and unworthy. Yet for most of the next century, her name vanished from history. We're going to bring her back. 1867, Richmond, Virginia. A city still charred from Civil War. Maggie Lena Mitchell enters this world in the shadow of loss and reconstruction. Her mother, Elizabeth Draper, carries the scars of slavery from the Van Loo household. Her stepfather, William Mitchell, works as a butler. The family lives on College Alley, a narrow street behind mansions. She sees wealth up close, but lives outside its walls. This shapes everything she becomes. The family lived on College Alley, a narrow street behind the mansion. Walker grew up watching her mother take in laundry to keep the family fed. She watched those hands, rough and reddened, move through soapy water every morning.
She filed that image away.
30 years later, when she opens her bank, she will remember these hands, the hands of people banks had forgotten.
Walker attended the colored normal school in Richmond.
She graduated in 1883 at age 16. That same year, she joined the Independent Order of St. Luke.
The order was a mutual aid society.
Members paid in when they could and drew on the fund when sickness or death hit. The order filled that gap with pennies and trust. Walker worked as a teacher after graduation.
She married Armstead Walker in 1886.
Virginia law at the time required women teachers to resign upon marriage. She resigned and turned her full attention to the order. By 1895, the Independent Order of St. Luke was near collapse. Its treasury held $31.61. That is roughly $1,100 in today's money. Membership had fallen. The order asked Walker to take over as right-worthy Grand Secretary. She accepted. Here is what she found when she opened the books: debt, no operational plan, and a membership that had lost faith in the institution.
She did not call for outside help. She called a meeting of the women.
The women of the order, the washerwomen and domestic workers, were the economic engine.
They were the ones paying dues when their husbands could not.
They were the ones sitting with sick neighbors, covering burial costs, keeping families intact. She transforms the order's finances through meticulous reorganization. Her recruitment strategy reaches across the South, bringing thousands into the fold. In 1902, she launches the St. Luke Herald newspaper, a bold move that shifts power. Now, black families in Richmond have their own voice, a place to publish, organize, and speak without asking permission. No white newspaper in Virginia was covering their lives.
Then came the bank.
Walker had watched her community lose money for decades through no fault of their own. Black families in Richmond had no safe place to deposit savings. Walker proposed a solution to the order's members in 1902. She named it St. Luke Penny Savings Bank pennies, all they were permitted to build with. Savings, because that was what the system denied them. $25,000 in 1903 is roughly $800,000 today. Every dollar came from the mutual aid network Walker had built over 8 years. On November 2nd, 1903, the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank opened its doors.
Walker took her seat as president.
No white institution in Virginia had a woman sitting in that chair. And the people who built that bank had been told their whole lives they had nothing worth saving. The bank opened on a Monday, and Richmond took notice immediately.
Not with celebration, with calculation.
It was not a charity project or a community gesture. It was a competing financial institution inside a city they controlled. Walker had built something that could redirect black dollars away from white-owned businesses. And she had done it using money white banks had refused to touch.
Here is where it turns.
Within months of opening, Walker proposed the next piece of her plan: a department store, owned and operated by the order, staffed by black women.
The Emporium was not just a store.
It was a proof of concept that black dollars could circulate inside a black economy. White wholesale suppliers in Richmond watched that logic and moved against it. They cut off inventory to the Emporium, refusing to sell goods to a black-run store.
Shelves began to thin out over several months.
Walker stood inside the emporium and looked at what was left. 15 black women who worked that floor kept showing up every morning. They had families, and they needed those wages. Walker could have gone to the white suppliers and negotiated terms. That would have kept the shelves full and kept her people employed. It would have also handed control of her institution back to the people trying to break it. She closed the emporium in 1911, rather than operate on their terms. Walked back to the bank and opened the ledger. The bank she could protect. What happened next tested everything Walker had built. Richmond streetcars became the battleground. This was 1904, 51 years before Montgomery, Alabama, became synonymous with that strategy. Black riders paid the same fare as white riders and sat in the back. Black residents of Richmond walked, hired private transport, and organized their own car services. The boycott held for months and forced real losses on the streetcar company.
The Virginia law did not fall.
But Walker had showed something that would take decades to name properly. Collective economic withdrawal was a weapon, and she had already deployed it. Your community paid full fare to sit in a lesser seat, and Walker said no before almost anyone else did. The boycott got no national coverage.
No white newspaper ran the story as significant.
That record survived because Walker had built the press herself.
By the time the bank had been operating for 2 decades,
it held close to $8 million in today's money, built from domestic workers' pennies. Walker had also expanded the order's membership to more than 100,000 people across the country. She was managing a financial network that reached from Virginia to Texas.
And yet no national biography carried her name.
No history textbook published in the 1920s taught her as a figure in American banking. When Walker appeared in print outside Richmond, she appeared in the women's pages, not the business section. A woman who chartered a bank and directed a 100,000-member financial network was filed under social news.
That placement was a choice made by editors.
It had the effect of separating her work from the category of serious finance. Monuments are safe. Institutions that generate black wealth are not. Then came 1929. The world collapsed. Walker had been using a wheelchair since 1907 after a fall severely damaged her mobility.
She ran the bank from that chair through the Depression.
As smaller institutions collapsed around her, she negotiated a merger, creating Consolidated Bank and Trust Company, which survived. Walker kept her seat on the board until her death in 1934. Not sudden, not loud, just an absence. Her name moved out of the curriculum over the following decades. By 1950, most American school children had no access to her story through any standard textbook. The bank she built survived her, kept black families solvent in Richmond for decades more.
Her name did not travel with it into the national story.
History found room for the institution and lost the woman who built it from $31.61. Walker's name came back slowly, and not by accident. In 1978, the National Park Service designated her home a historic site. The house on Lee Street in Richmond still stands today.
The wheelchair is visible just past the entrance.
The desk where she ran a financial empire is still there too. But the house was named a landmark 74 years after she opened the bank. 3 generations of American students grew up never knowing her name existed.
Here is what that gap actually cost.
Walker had built a proof of concept that black economic self-sufficiency was possible. She had done it with a mutual aid network, a newspaper, and a savings bank. And she had done it in a former Confederate capital using the city's own financial logic against it. Every generation that did not learn her name also did not learn her method. The method was specific: pool small money, build institutions, keep capital circulating inside the community. Without her name, the method had no model. Your grandmother may have paid dues to a mutual aid society and never known who built that architecture. The Consolidated Bank and Trust Company, the institution Walker helped carry through the Depression,
operated in Richmond for decades after her death.
It closed in 2009, during the financial crisis that took dozens of community banks with it. 106 years after Walker opened the first account, that institution was gone. What remained was the building on East Broad Street and a thin file in the archive.
Now look at the numbers that surround that closure.
In 1988, There were roughly 50 black-owned banks operating across the United States. By 2023, that number had fallen to fewer than 20. The network Walker built at the start of the century pointed in one direction. The decades that followed pulled everything Walker built away, brick by brick.
That is policy working.
The forces that erased Walker's legacy didn't vanish with her death. They evolved, adapted, and continued their work through decades of deliberate forgetting. Regulations established during the Depression era advantaged wealthy, established corporations, mutual aid societies, the exact structure Walker used to build her bank, were progressively squeezed out of regulatory frameworks. Operating expenses overwhelmed smaller grassroots financial ventures, and penny collection models became unworkable under tightening compliance costs.
Nobody rewrote history in one meeting. The structure just kept tightening.
Walker ran her board meetings in a wheelchair and negotiated with men who had never seen a woman.
At that table, she kept her voice flat and her numbers clean.
Because in that room, the numbers were the only argument they had to accept. She died in Richmond on December 15, 1934. She was 67 years old.
The Richmond newspapers ran obituaries. The national financial press did not.
A woman who had managed a 100,000-member network across 22 states rated no column space in the business section of any national paper. She appeared again in the social pages. That placement was a choice. Its shadow would follow her for decades.
History does not erase people in a single act.
It moves them to the wrong shelf and then stops telling anyone which shelf that is.
Walker was in the archive the whole time.
Her ledgers, her speeches, her orders records, all of it preserved. The National Park Service found it. Historians found it.
The evidence was never missing.
And yet the press, the schools, and the regulatory record each placed her in a lesser column. Not through coordination, but through systems perpetuating their own priorities. The effect was the same as a deliberate act. Her name stayed off the list. In 2017, the U.S. Treasury Department named Walker a finalist for redesigning the $10 bill.
She did not make the final selection.
Harriet Tubman was selected for the $20 bill, a decision later delayed by Treasury officials in the first Trump administration. The debate about whose face belongs on American currency is still happening now.
In the same years that black-owned banks continue closing,
Walker built a bank before the Federal Reserve existed. She started with $31.61 in community confidence. She survived a supply boycott, a segregation law, a stock market collapse, and ran board meetings from a wheelchair until the year she died. Washerwomen, porters, laborers, every one of them told their whole lives they had nothing worth saving. They saved anyway.
she counted every cent.
And the bank she built outlasted the men who tried to stop it.
The wheelchair is still in the front room on Lee Street.
Every penny recorded in permanent ink. The story was never lost. It was shelved. That distance between exclusion and opportunity, that's the power we're uncovering.